Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. Ireland is well known for potatoes, but arguably more for the failure of potatoes due to blight in the 1840s. The control of blight is every bit as important today as it was back in the 1840s, but the difference today is we are more knowledgeable and we've better tools to control blight. However, factors such as the loss of fungicides and new emerging blight variants, similar to the COVID variants, are all challenging established control practices. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Shay Phelan, a potato specialist in Oak Park, to discuss blight control in potatoes. Shay, you're very welcome to the podcast. I first just want to start by asking you might just give listeners an idea about the amount of potatoes grown this year in Ireland and how does that compare to other years?
Yes, Michael. So look, generally speaking, we grow somewhere between about 8 and 8,500 hectares of potatoes every year. And that's broken down into about 7,500 to 8,000 hectares of main crop varieties. So varieties like Rooster, Golden Wonders, Kerrs Pinks. And then we have early potatoes. So we have the likes of Home Guards, British Queens would all be classified in those. So we generally grow about 700 hectares of those. And we also grow somewhere in the region of about 150 to 200 hectares per annum of seed potatoes as well. And that has stabilized over the last 6 or 7 years. Before that, we used to grow more, but it's kind of stabilized in around that 8 to 8,500 hectares over the last 3, 4, 5 years. So that's kind of ballpark what we grow every year.
And just ask you, why is it at that particular area now?
I suppose, look, we've settled down to whatever markets that we fulfill now. So most of that, what product is grown there is grown for your supermarkets and for fresh table consumption. We grow a small bit of processing stuff for, say, the likes of the crisping and fresh chips, but the vast majority of that is settled down to those markets that growers are filling every week in terms of supermarket supply and that. So those supply chains are pretty static year in, year out. The supermarkets pretty much know how much potatoes they want in any given year, and we're growing to that market now. Whereas before we used to grow a lot and speculate, now growers are growing to those contracted markets, if you like.
Okay, so it's pretty much a domestic market with no exports whatsoever.
No exports at all.
And for those potatoes coming to the ground, how are they looking at the moment?
Kind of a mixed bag, to be honest. As you might be aware, most people are aware, the main crop varieties were planted earlier this year than normal. So pretty much everything, bar a few guys in the northwest, were finished planting by the May bank holiday weekend, which is early in terms of an Irish season. And then, of course, May came the way it came in terms of we had lower temperatures than normal, and we had frosts and we had plenty of rain. So ground conditions got very cold on potatoes. So what we're seeing is that there was kind of a delayed emergence in some crops and uneven emergence in some crops as well. But having said that, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, the warm weather that we've had and the sunny weather that we've had in the last 2 or 3 weeks in June has seen a lot of them caught up. That said, there are crops out there still with a little bit of uneven emergence, and those later emerging plants are struggling to catch up to the earlier emerged ones as well. So that could have an implication later on the season in terms of maturity for those tubers as well. So it's a little bit of a problem there, but it's not everywhere. It's just in some of those crops.
Okay, so generally pretty good. So this year, Shane, I really want to kind of focus and talk about blight. And as we know, that's probably one of the most important diseases in potatoes. From my very little knowledge, I know there's a few changes coming along the line that growers need to know about, and they're probably going to have to adjust what they do as regards blight control over the next, certainly in 2021 and thereafter. There's 3 or 4 of them there. There's one around the changing blight. There's one around how we forecast blight. But maybe you might touch upon the first one, which is around the loss of some of the fungicides this year.
Yeah, so the big news, I suppose, for potato growers this year has been the loss of Mancozeb, or the impending loss of Mancozeb. So the re-registration of Mancozeb was going on last year, and it failed to get re-registration in at the back end of last year. So basically that means this is the last season that we're going to be able to use Mancozeb based products. And while most people will probably be familiar with the term Mancozeb. They'll be more familiar with the different products that it's found in the likes of Diethane 945, which is probably a staple blight fungicide that many growers that have used for the last 30 or 40 years. But it's also in other products like the likes of Ridamil Gold, Corazade, and those products would all have been used by most growers during the season. Now, over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, Mancozeb-based products have become less important in terms of blight control as we've had more newer and better products come on the market. But that said, it still formed quite an important role early in the season as a contact fungicide early in the season for those first one or two applications when the crop is small at the rosette stage. So from that point of view, that's going to put extra pressure on other fungicide options that we have there. And the one thing that we have to be aware of is that with potatoes and blight, we generally, certainly in a commercial situation, we have a programmed approach whereby most growers will apply a fungicide on a weekly or if not 10-day basis. So you're looking at 12, maybe 14 applications during the year. So where you have Mancozeb and you take out 2 of those applications or maybe even 3 of those applications early in the season, they have to be replaced by other available products. So each of these products have a limited number of applications that you're allowed to put on in any given season. So it means that growers are going to have to calculate out how many or where they put the different options that are still available and how they can match them up and what best suits that early market. So they're going to have to sit down with their agronomists and just develop out a full program approach and detailing all the different products that they're allowed to use from now on. Otherwise, you could see exceedances of applications of certain fungicides, and that's never good.
Okay, we might get your view in a minute just as regards what that program, a typical program, might look like. But I presume when the farmer and the agronomist are sitting down to think about that, they also have to consider the type of blight that's out there and the populations that are there. And I believe there have been a number of changes in the blight population over the last number of years. You might maybe fill us in on that.
Yeah, look, the Euroblight is an organisation which monitors blight populations and fungicide efficacy across all the different countries across Europe. And generally speaking, they track the different development of different strains of blight over years. So we've seen different strains come and go, and we've had pink 6 and blue 13 and all these type of different strains. But lately, what we've seen is a particular strain called 3782. And 3782 is a strain of blight that's resistant to a fungicide called Fluazinam. And Fluazinam is a very popular fungicide that used all across Europe. It's commonly known as something like Shirlan. It's also in something like Volley, Teagasc, Fluazinova. So it's a very commonly used fungicide. And where guys are using it or growers are using it, it has a maximum number of applications of 10 applications per season. So it is a widely used fungicide, and some of the smaller growers that grow maybe an acre or 2, whatever it is, quite often that would maybe do their full program for the year, even though you could argue the rights and wrongs of that. But some of those growers, it was a very handy tool to have, that they could just use the same fungicide and use it throughout the season, and they were getting reasonably good control with that. But if that's taken away from us now, and that's another product that is going to be largely unavailable, then that's an issue. And what we know is that while other countries are seeing this 3782 strain develop very quickly over the last number of years, up until last year, we had only found it in Northern Ireland on this island. But last year, Stephen Kildare found it here in Oak Park as well. So we know that 3782 strain is here in the country. So we just have to monitor that situation. And if people are seeing blight out there and they're not sure what it is, maybe send it in to us here. We have a limited capacity to test it, but it gives us a bit more information in terms of how prevalent that strain is out there. So where people were normally using Shirlan late on in the season, where it had good zoospore control, so it was giving us good tuber blight control. So now we're advising people not to use Shirlan in that situation. Maybe there's an option to use it early on the season where you're not putting stuff in the store and you're going to have other products coming afterwards. But even then, where you're using, or if somebody wants to use Fluazinam or Shirlan, whatever you want to call it, they should be using it with a partner product. So something like a Sumoxinol option or something like that would be a good partner product to put there with that, so that if you do have some blight in the crop, the Sumoxinol has a curative effect and will knock it down. So it makes the situation a little bit more complicated, not only for the commercial grower, but for those smaller growers as well, who've been relying on the Shirlan type products over the last number of years.
And Shay, just in terms of those, what I suppose it doesn't matter whether you're a bigger or smaller grower, but if I, as a grower, was having relatively good success with Shirlan in the past, how do I know that that strain of blight is going to affect me this year?
You won't, Michael, and that's the problem. You won't know until you get a failure. And if you have a failure, then the chances are it could be that 3782. But because we've been trying to study the population in the last number of years to see what strains are out there, but we've had very limited number of samples come into us here in Oak Park. So we don't know how widespread this strain is across the country. But what we do know from other countries is that when it does get in, it generally spreads very, very quickly until it's overtaken by something else. So the chances are, if we found it in Oak Park, it's probably in the population. But again, because we only had very limited numbers of samples come into us in Oak Park last year, we have no idea how widespread that is across the country.
Okay, so sending samples in is critical for the industry to give them an idea where things
Absolutely.
are.
Absolutely.
So having those fungicides and knowing where the blight populations are, that's kind of two parts of a puzzle, if you like, or maybe a three-card trick. The other one is when to apply them to get the best from a blight control program. I think there was new research carried out here in Oak Park to try and improve this blight forecasting. Maybe you might give us an idea about where that research is and is it having any impact on the ground?
Yeah, so as you say, we carried out some research here over the last number of years with a PhD student working on the forecasting system. And to kind of go back on the background a little bit, the system that Met Eireann have used for the last number of years was developed in the 50s and 60s. So it was an old model, if you like, and it was based on a couple of parameters that you had leaf wetness and 90% relative humidity for a period of about 12 hours. And you had temperatures above 10 degrees, and that generated a blight warning. So what Met Eireann did then over time was develop that into warnings. And they'd issue a warning just based on those conditions anywhere in the country. So if there was a station which was reading that 90% relative humidity and had leaf wetness, and you had temperatures over 10 degrees for 12 hours, it generated a blight warning for the country. So what the research here has done over the last number of years is kind of distill that down a little bit to try and make them a little bit more user friendly, if you like. So the changes are quite small in terms of what you might think are quite small, but they've changed the 90% relative humidity down to 88% relative humidity. And the period of 12 hours of relative humidity can continue on. So if you have, say, 10 hours of relative humidity at the right conditions, and it stopped then for a period, but it took up again maybe 3 or 4 hours later, that would still generate enough data, enough conditions to generate a blight warning. Whereas the old measurement was very definitive. Once you had gone by the 12 hours, the warning had stopped. The other thing that the change that is going to be implemented this year is that they're going to be more local based. So if you go onto the Met Eireann website and you Google Met Eireann blight warning, you will see, and there is one up there at the moment, blight warning for the western counties, so Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim, Mayo, and Galway. There's a blight warning for those counties at the moment. Before, this would have been a blight warning for the whole country. So we know, even though it's wet today, that the blight warning is basically for those western counties. The counties in the south and east don't have that blight warning. Now, what the new parameters will do is they will generate more blight warnings as we go through the season, but they'll be more targeted. So the theory is then that they should be more applicable to growers, whether you be a professional grower or a commercial grower or a part-time grower.
And Shane, just on those warnings, are they kind of for a day or so ahead as the old one was, or are they a little bit more far-reaching, if you like, 7 or 8 or 10 days ahead?
They're generally issuing them on a more regular basis, so it's as those conditions are coming, so they can predict about 5 or 7 days ahead, and you'll see which day that the conditions are going to be applicable for. So it gives the grower a warning that they can spray whichever day before the blight warning actually affects. So they're doing two things there. So they're giving you the warning itself and when conditions are good to spray for blight.
Okay. So Shay, before we get into the fungicides part of it and building a program around fungicides, in terms of cultural control measures, you might just briefly give me, I don't know, the top 3 or 4 that a farmer really needs to be looking at to make sure that blight is kept to a minimum.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a full integrated pest management strategy, Michael, is the way we have to go with all pests now. So one of the key cornerstones of preventing blight is removing sources of blight, and that's the keystone for every grower, no matter your size, location, wherever it happens to be. So if you have, say, potato dumps or where people might have thrown out skins or anything like that, anywhere a potato grows is a potential source of blight. So any of those groundkeepers, volunteers in cereal crops or wherever they may be, they should all be taken care of or removed or destroyed, whichever the case may be, as an initial point source for blight. So that's probably the first place that people should go. The second one probably would be more about the applications of blight products. Okay, so where farmers are growing fields of potatoes, kind of difficult to reach areas are the first place that the blight will get in. So if there's a weakness in the program, maybe a boom can't get to a corner of a field or a bend in the field or around a pole or something like that, don't sow potatoes in those areas because they're going to act as a source and a sink for blight to get in and a source of infection. So they're probably the two main ones, Michael, that anybody can implement in terms of trying to prevent blight getting into crops. And I suppose the thing to be aware of, whether no matter your size or location of your crop, if you have an infection in your crop, that acts as a source of infection for other crops potentially nearby. And I came across a case like this in North Dublin a couple of years ago, where we had a garden grower growing potatoes beside a garden centre, and the blight in his plot of potatoes spread out into a commercial crop right beside it and continually infected that crop. So even when the farmer was spraying it, there was still a source of blight getting into his crop every week.
Okay. So maybe then, just in terms of a programmed approach as regards using those blight fungicides for farmers. So at the moment, crops are, I suppose, in canopy expansion, rapid canopy expansion. Where does, from this week onwards, what sort of fungicide approach should growers be using?
Yeah, you're right. We're in the middle of rapid canopy phase now. So if you would think of the way the plant is growing at the moment, so rapid canopy phase means that the canopy is growing very, very fast. And the target has always been to have the crop met in the rows by the longest day of the year. So that was a couple of days ago. So the crop is putting on new leaves every week. So at this time of the year, contact fungicides, the likes of the Mancozebs that we were talking about earlier on, which are more suitable to the earlier part of the season, aren't really suitable now. So you're looking at something with systemic activity, and common products like Infinito, Zorvec, those type of products are the types of products growers should be using now in the rapid canopy phase. And that's going to continue for the next two, three, maybe even 4 applications, depending on when the crop was planted. So you would tend then within that to try and alternate those products. So if we take Infinito, for example, you would use it twice and then maybe 2 Zorvecs. And I suppose the key, or just a point to note about the Zorvec type products, which the oxythiopropylene, is that those give very good control for about 10 days, whereas other products tend to give it for 7 days. So what some or many farmers are doing now is they're using 2 applications of that Zorvec product to give you 3 weeks control, because you're getting up to 21 days control. So they will actually be able to miss a week, if you like, by using those 2 products back to back. In a sequence. And then when you get to stable canopy phase, kind of mid-July onwards, you tend to move back to those translaminar kind of contact products, the likes of Revis, Ranman, those type of products. And that's fine then. A couple of applications of them are fine then until you get to kind of the August phase, where you're starting to see crop senescence. And then you want products that are quite good on tuber blight. And that's where our Shirlan was traditionally used. But again, the advice this year is not to use them in that scenario, because if you get blight in then and you bring that in the store, it's going to spread in the store. So instead, in that kind of late season phase where you're looking for tuber blight control, again, the likes of Ranman Top would be a good product there choice in that scenario. And Infinito, again, would be a good product choice in that scenario as well. But again, you have to be careful about the numbers of applications. For Ranman, you can apply it 6 times during the season. For Infinito, you can only apply it 4. So you have to just plan out where you're going to put those products over the next 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks. So, it's a programmed approach in terms of mixing and matching all and alternating all those products for the rest of the season, should I say.
Okay, so Shay, and we put a couple of those kind of things together. So up till, say, very recently, at least, or up until today, certainly in Carlow here, weather was very dry, and say a potato farmer here in Carlow, there was no blight warnings on the go. The canopy is expanding quite rapidly. Blight isn't due to spread. In terms of the sequence of some of those fungicides that you're talking about, can they be expanded if there is no blight warnings out there, or is a farmer still kind of pretty well bound to that week or 10 days between the applications anyway?
It depends on the risk they want to incur, Michael. So, as I said before, most commercial growers are taking a programmed approach where they spray weekly, and that's a risk mitigation strategy. That if the products that they use will last for about 4 days in the crop, and then you're looking at 3 days, 2 or 3 days of little or no cover. So if you extend out that period between the 2 applications of products, you're leaving the crop at risk for a longer period of time because you really have no cover. Now, we do have options there in terms of Sumoxone, which has a knockdown effect. But what can often happen, we've seen it before, where people have stretched intervals, that if you don't get around to a crop or there's a freak thunder shower or something like that, you can get a blight in very, very quickly. And then you're into a situation where you're trying to cure that problem, and you end up putting on maybe 2 or 3 fungicides or an extra application of a fungicide just to clean up that crop. So in that case, commercial guys don't like taking that risk because you're chasing the disease then, and it's difficult to control. If you're a smaller grower, yes, by all means, there are definitely cases there where you can say, well, right, I'm going to be able to spray all my crop in a half an hour or something like that, and I can do that. Whereas a commercial grower, it might take 2 or 3 days to get around all their crop. But in the case where you're in a smaller grower, you might be able to do it in a short period of time. Absolutely, there's cases there where you can stretch out those intervals quite easily.
Okay, so maybe when you're talking about the smaller grower, and I suppose what I'm thinking about here is maybe the back garden grower, the non-commercial grower, if you like, or the non-professional grower. What sort of options does that grower have in terms of blight control products at the moment? Because I think that the likes of Mancozeb or Dietane probably would have been maybe the core of what might have been used by that grower in the past.
Yeah, so again, we have to distinguish here as well, Michael, in that Mancozeb products were only allowed to be used by people who were trained pesticide users. Okay, so you're talking about, in most cases, farmers and maybe some horticulturalists as well. So for those type of people who are growing maybe an acre on a farm and they're just using for the house, you still have the other options. You still have the likes of Infinito. You still have if you want to use Shirlan at some stage, you have the option of Sumoxones as well, which are the knockdown products. The problem with all those is if you have all those products in the store, they are quite expensive and they come in pretty sizable packs, some of them. So you're ending up spending a lot of money on your few drills of potatoes. So really you're looking at, there are kind of some, there's one particular product which is Bayer Potato Blight, I think it's what it's called, which is found in most garden centres, which is a small amount of an Infinito type product. But again, bear in mind, you can only use that 4 times during the season. But for many growers, that may well be enough to get them out. So that's pretty much what we're looking at. Maybe mix it in with whatever bit of Mancozeb is still knocking around this year, if you can still use it, or if you still have it. And that's probably as good as they can do for the moment.
Okay. So with all the talk of these potatoes, Shay, I'm starting to think about the earlies, and I'm certainly really, really want to get my hands and or my teeth, I should say, into some of those. In terms of the earlies, are they're on the shelf, I think, at the moment? How are they doing in terms of yield, dry matter, or taste wise? How are they going?
Yeah, they're, as you said, they're out there. They've been out there probably a week later this year than would normally have been the case, and the bank holiday in June being that week later probably helped sales a bit because it gave the growers that extra week to get them in. But again, no different than the main crop. Those cold temperatures in April and May certainly hit yields a bit. Their yields, I'm told, are back maybe 10-15% in places, but they're starting to look at the bug pretty quickly during June. So the yields are probably back up to 6-7 tons an acre. So they're doing quite well. Taste wise and all that, they seem to be okay. Again, it depends on your taste. Some people like them, some people don't like them, and they tend to be a little bit low in dry matter in comparison to, say, something like a British Queen, which will come on in 3 to 4 weeks. So they are doing reasonably well, I'm told, for most guys, but there are some crops out there that were badly affected by frost, and they are that little bit later.
Okay, thanks very much, Shay. You're a mind of information, and it's great to have you talking about potatoes. We'll get you back later in the season to maybe have an update on that, because I know there are certain challenges later on in the year in terms of trying to burn down or trying to control the canopy in preparation for harvest. So, Shay, thank you very much.
No problem, Michael.
So that's it for the Tillage Edge, and my thanks to Shay for joining me. There's still a number of upcoming events which you should tune into or attend for the coming weeks. The final ECT webinar takes place on Tuesday, July the 6th at 11:30 a.m. It centres around farmers in the south with a focus on Italian ryegrass, blackgrass and bromes from the project focused farmers who are practicing plough, min-till and no-till systems. The Oak Park Trials Day will take place next week on June the 30th and July the 1st. You can only attend this by booking first, and there are only a few places left. So for more details and to register, check out the Teagasc website as soon as you can. There will be a webinar from Oak Park Trials Day in conjunction with the Irish Farmers Journal, which will air on Wednesday the 30th of June at 8 p.m. This will be available to everyone from the Irish Farmers Journal website or from the Teagasc Crops YouTube page. So finally, don't forget, if you like this podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.